Welcome back, students of economics. This is continuation of our economics perspective learning session. Covered lots of ground in the previous videos related to the economics perspective. We will continue along that same ride in this video. The specific topic of this lesson, the economic systems. Here we have some of the big names in economic thinking. We can think of these individuals as the founding fathers of the philosophy which has become known as economics. Adam Smith, already spoke of Adam Smith in some detail, 1776, Wealth of Nations, Scottish philosopher. In his book outlined the principles of markets and capitalism, his ethical theory on how he believed a society should be organized. David Ricardo, not too long after the writings of Adam Smith, wrote extensively on trade and international trade. We will examine international trade in much more detail later in the term. Ricardo's theory on comparative advantage is the economic rationale behind trade. We will discuss the pros and cons of international trade, the winners and losers of trade. John Stuart Mill, along with his pal Jeremy Bentham, extensive writings on utilitarianism as a philosophical theory which definitely has implications and applications for economics. Karl Marx, Communist Manifesto. His book was a rebuke of capitalism. Marx witnessed what was taking place with owners and what he thought were the ills of the system, and he wrote about what is known as the working class or the proletariat rising up to take control of the economic resources and a more fair and equitable system to decide how goods and services are produced and distributed. John Maynard Keynes, British economist, famous for his writings during the Great Depression. Keynes was a believer in markets, but also understood the need for government and the role government plays when the economy falls into a recession which the private sector cannot escape by itself. We will discuss John Maynard Keynes and Keynesian economics historically and his contributions to modern economic thinking and the controversy of his policies on today's economic issues and debates. All of our economic theories, every single principle and concept, all of the rationale developed from these individuals is intermingled into our course. The focus of this video is the economic systems. Limited, scarce economic resources, unlimited economic desires and wants. We have to coordinate a system to answer the question of how to maximize the most efficient use of society's scarce resources. So every economic system on Earth must solve four coordination issues or answer four coordination questions. The first one, what to produce? What goods and services should society produce? The second one, how much of each good or service to produce? The third question, how to go about the production, how to produce it. And then finally, question number 4, for whom to produce it? Who will receive the benefit or utility of the production? These are the 4 basic questions that every economic system must answer. Now, in the long run, there's a 5th question. So in the long run, there's a question of how to accommodate change. Remember, every country, every nation, every economy must answer these coordination problems and questions. So broadly speaking, there are only 2 economic systems on planet Earth. Broadly speaking, there are 2 economic systems. We have laissez-faire market capitalism, and we have socialism, the command system. The major philosophical difference between these 2 systems is ownership of economic resources. It all boils down to who owns the resources. Market system proponents of private ownership of economic resources. The command system, socialism, we have central planning or government control of economic resources. Let's investigate capitalism in more detail. As mentioned on the previous slide, the major philosophical difference between our two economic systems of capitalism and socialism is who owns the economic resources. Under the market-based system of capitalism, we have private ownership of economic resources. Ultimately, households own the economic resources in market-based capitalism. Remember, there's three components in a society. Households, businesses make up the private sector. Government makes up the public sector. Now, in your mind, you might be thinking, well, hold on, don't businesses own the economic resources? Well, remember, in a free democracy such as the United States, the businesses are all owned by individuals / households. So if you think about a mom and pop shop, whether it's a local pizza parlor or bakery or dry cleaners, it's easy to understand how one person, even though it's a business, the household owns that business. But even on a larger scale, when you look at the corporate form of business in the United States, corporations are also ultimately owned by shareholders, and it's households that own the shares, right? So private ownership of economic resources is the principal tenet of market-based capitalism. When attempting to answer the important coordination issues and questions, what to produce, how to produce it, how much to produce it, right, and for whom to produce it, market-based capitalism believes that the market mechanism is the most efficient tool for answering those questions. Adam Smith wrote extensively on what is known as the invisible hand. He described a scenario by which resources flow towards the production of goods and services which maximize utility of citizens in that nation. In other words, people going to the market vote with their dollars on which goods and services they believe maximize their happiness. Therefore, it signals producers to produce more of that product or service. Obviously, if something grows out of favor, right, resources will flow away from the production of that good or service. Another means to explain this is referred to as the rationing function of prices. Now, it also applies to economic resource. In other words, if labor is more necessary to produce a certain good or service, a manufacturer will not have any problem paying higher wages to attract good workers if ultimately the product or service being produced can be sold at a profitable price. So therefore, the labor resource will flow towards the production of that good or service. The beauty of the market mechanism and the invisible hand and the rationing function of prices is that there's no need for a government to intervene or decide what goods should be produced or what the price for good or service should be or how much of a good or service should be produced for society. Pure laissez-faire market-based capitalism believes in limited government. Laissez-faire literally means hands off. The government should protect the right to private property, which is tenet number one or principle number one that the government is responsible for. And the government should make certain that there is a functioning legal system that enforces contracts, which makes certain all market participants must play by the rules of the game. Now, of course, you have the idea that the government also has a military to protect the nation from foreign foes and police to make certain that there's, not lawlessness on the streets. But in pure laissez-faire market capitalism, there's limited government. The government only provides certain services necessary to facilitate the market mechanism. Why do proponents of capitalism believe it is the best system? Well, there's no doubt that capitalism drives efficiency. Limited economic resources, unlimited economic wants. Market-based capitalism, it has been proven over time, will lead to the most efficient use of society's limited or scarce resources. Capital, labor, land will flow towards the production of goods and services that benefit society to the greatest deal based on people's demand for and voting with their dollars on which goods and services they believe are providing happiness in society. The other beauty about market-based capitalism is that it encourages innovation and it provides incentives to work hard, to be industrious, to be creative. Women and men who are innovative, industrious, and creative can be rewarded handsomely under market-based capitalism. So it incentivizes individuals to work to the best of their ability, to put more effort into their creative ideas, and to think outside the box and introduce new goods and services that didn't exist in the past. That's one of the stalwart principles of our market-based system of United States capitalism, and it has been proven over the last 200 years that Americans are extremely efficient at creativity and industriousness. Socialism, opposite approach. Instead of having private ownership of economic resources, you have a command system where the government takes ownership of the economic resources. You saw this in history with Lenin and Stalin in the former Soviet Union, the idea that the government controlled what they called the commanding heights. The government decided how much wheat would be produced, how many rail cars would be produced, right? How much steel would be produced. So government ownership of economic resources to answer the questions of what to produce, how to produce it, how much to produce it, right? For whom to receive the benefits. Central planning, right? And the idea is that the central planning institution or government will decide what will be the price and what will be the level of production. You have to give Karl Marx credit for, we will say, the ethical and philosophical goal of his economic theory. And that was a more equitable society. Each to his own, each to his ability, is a famous Marx saying in the Communist Manifesto. The idea was that owners in capitalism tended to have tremendous wealth while the workers labored for long hours and sometimes had unsavory work conditions and didn't get compensated to a high degree. Marx believed that if the government took control of resources, we could create a more equitable society. Unfortunately, it's been proven that absolute socialism or central planning tends to create a lack of the very fruits and benefits of capitalism. Efficiency falls behind, innovation is difficult, and left to their druthers, if everyone's being compensated equally, it disincentivizes creativity and industrious behavior. That's the principal criticism of the socialist system in central planning. Even if well-to-do, so if you look at someone like Chairman Mao in China, who took control of the Chinese government after World War II, right? Unfortunately, millions of people starved because, as it turns out, the market mechanism is an efficient tool for determining how many resources are necessary for society to produce something as basic as food. Right? Central planning has failed on providing even the most basic of human needs, and it's one of the major criticisms of socialism as an economic system. This is a helpful graphic. What this graphic does, it allows us to discuss the difference between economic theory of economic systems versus the economic reality of where countries actually operate as far as their systems are concerned today. So the general idea here is that there is not really a nation that resembles pure laissez-faire capitalism or absolute central planning. Okay? Most economies are some mix between the two versions of the economic systems. So if we look at this graphic, on the right-hand side it says pure free market. On the right-hand side, pure competition. Adam Smith, Wealth of the Nations, laissez-faire economics. The market determines what to produce, how much to produce, how to produce it, and for whom to produce it. On the left-hand side, you have Karl Marx, central planning, socialism, where the government answers the 4 questions of coordination: what to produce, how to produce it, how much to produce it, and for whom to produce it. Notice down bottom, it shows you with the arrows where countries lie on this graphic today. So even the United States, which is free market capitalism allegedly, has a high degree of welfare economics intermingled into our economy. After the Great Depression, the government has played a much larger role in the U.S. economy than previously. So the proponents of classical economics, known as the classical theorists, the disciples of Adam Smith, their version or vision of capitalism doesn't really exist. And the Japanese economy would be similar to the U.S. economy, mostly based on the principles of free markets, private ownership of economic resources, allowing the market to determine, using the rationing function of prices and the invisible hand, how resources are allocated and how goods and services are produced. But there's still a steady amount of government intervention to redistribute income and to police some of the ills of capitalism that we discussed earlier, such as pollution or unsafe work practices. If you look at a country like North Korea, notice North Korea is, in theory, a centrally planned economy. Now, I know it's a dictatorship, but it was built on the principles of communism. Even North Korea is not pure central planning. Even North Korea has some degree of market-based economics built into their system. An interesting country to analyze would be one such as China. China used to be far left. So if you were using this graph to represent economic systems of the world post-World War II under Mao Zedong, you would say, yes, under Mao, China was much closer to central planning. About 30 years ago, China decided to implement some market-based reforms, mostly because socialist practices were failing the people and there was serious inefficiencies causing economic harm to the population. So China, in theory, is communism. In reality, a large degree of market-based capitalism. Another interesting comparison would be, look at United States and Japan relative to France, Sweden. So the difference between what we would say the U.S. version of capitalism, with some welfare reforms and government intervention, as opposed to the European model. The European model has more government regulations and a higher degree of income redistribution through the taxation system. So European countries are capitalist in theories, but more welfare-based capitalist systems, so more of a mix between the two economies than the United States. This concludes this video. There will be one more video in the Economics Perspectives lecture series following this particular video.